When I first moved to Chicago for work, I rented a cheap one-bedroom in an old brick building on the west side. The place had charm, arched windows, creaky hardwood floors, but it was also the kind of building where you could hear everything your neighbors did. Conversations, footsteps, even the squeak of pipes when someone showered. My unit was on the third floor, and directly above me was another one-bedroom that, according to the landlord, had been empty for months. At first, I was relieved. No upstairs neighbor meant peace and quiet, but it didn't stay quiet for long. About a week after I settled in, I started hearing footsteps at night, heavy ones, pacing back and forth across the ceiling. I remember lying in bed, staring up, listening as someone walked steadily from one end of the room to the other. I brushed it off as the building settling, or maybe the landlord showing the apartment late at night. Except it kept happening. Always after midnight, always the same deliberate pacing, back and forth. Finally, I asked the landlord if someone had moved in above me. He shook his head. No one's rented that unit yet. Been empty since February. He gave me a strange look, like he didn't want to talk about it. That night, the footsteps returned, louder this time. I lay there, every muscle tense, as they stopped right above my bed. The sound of a chair dragging followed, then a long silence. I didn't sleep. The next morning, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. But when I came home from work, I noticed something odd. A thin line of plaster dust sprinkled across my living room floor, as if part of the ceiling had been disturbed. I told myself I'd confront the landlord again if it continued. And it did. A few nights later, I woke to the sound of something heavier than footsteps, a thud, like someone had dropped to the floor upstairs. Then came dragging noises, slow and deliberate, like furniture scraping across wood. By now I was too unnerved to go back to sleep, so I sat on my couch, staring up at the ceiling. That's when I noticed it. Faint, rhythmic tapping, in sets of 3, coming directly from the unit above. I moved out of the bedroom and started sleeping on the couch with the TV on for background noise. But nothing drowned it out completely. Sometimes I swore I could hear muffled whispers through the ceiling, though the words never made sense. Eventually, my curiosity got the better of me. One Saturday afternoon, I slipped upstairs. The door to the vacant unit was locked, but I pressed my ear against it. Silence. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, or something, was inside. That evening, I told a neighbor about the noises. Her face paled immediately. She told me the last tenant had been a middle-aged man who lived alone. People described him as odd, but harmless. Until one winter night, he hung himself in the living room. No one found him for weeks. The landlord never mentioned this. After that conversation, the activity intensified. I'd wake to pounding directly above me, so forceful the ceiling light rattled. One night, my picture frame shook loose from the wall. Another time, I came home to find a faint handprint in the dust on my windowsill. On the inside, though I never opened the window. The last night I spent there is burned into my memory. I was half asleep on the couch when the pacing began again. Faster this time, almost frantic. Then came the dragging sound. Only this time, it didn't stay upstairs. It echoed down the stairwell. I sat upright, heart racing, listening as the footsteps descended from the unit above to the landing outside my door. The air grew cold, unnaturally so, and for a moment I swore I heard breathing on the other side of my door. Deep, ragged, like someone standing inches away. Then, 3 knocks. Slow, deliberate. I didn't move, didn't breathe, just sat frozen until morning light leaked through the blinds. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. But on the wood just above the handle, there were scratches, long, deep grooves that hadn't been there before. I moved out within the week. I've lived in several apartments since, and none of them have given me trouble. But sometimes, when the building is quiet and I'm lying awake at night, I swear I hear faint footsteps above me, pacing back and forth. And I wonder if he's still searching for a way downstairs. When I was in college, I rented a small basement apartment near campus. It was cheap, partly because the building was old, and partly because the basement always felt off. It was perpetually damp, the kind of cold that seeped into your bones even with the heat running. Still, it was close to school, and I didn't think much of the strange atmosphere at first. The first incident happened about a month in. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone when I heard it. Breathing. Not my own. Heavy, labored, coming from the dark corner of the room near my desk. I froze, held my breath, and listened. The sound stopped. I told myself it was the pipes or the building shifting. Old houses make noises, right? But the next night, it happened again. Same time, just after midnight. Deep, human-like breaths in the corner of my room. I started leaving music playing softly while I slept, hoping to drown it out. But some nights, even over the music, I'd hear it. Slow inhales and exhales, steady as if someone were standing just feet away. Things escalated when I woke one night to find the air so cold I could see my breath. My blanket had slipped off, but when I reached to pull it back, I realized it wasn't on the floor. It was folded neatly at the foot of the bed. I live alone. That's when I started keeping the lights on. One weekend, a friend crashed at my place after a late study session. I didn't mention anything, but the next morning she asked, half jokingly, "Why were you standing over me last night?" I hadn't moved from my bed. By then, I was sleeping maybe 3 hours a night, jumpy and exhausted. I decided to record while I slept using a cheapy audio app on my laptop. I let it run overnight and listened back in the morning. Most of it was silence. Then, around 2:13 a.m., I heard it, breathing. Deep, raspy, unnatural. Louder than it had ever sounded in person. And then, faintly, almost buried in the static, 2 words. Get out. That was enough. I packed up and moved back into the dorms within the week, even though it meant sharing a room again. I didn't care. A few months later, I bumped into the landlord. Out of curiosity, I asked if anyone had lived in that basement before me. He hesitated, then admitted the last tenant had left suddenly, breaking the lease. When I pressed him, he shrugged and said, "She swore she kept hearing someone breathing in the dark." To this day, I can't sleep in complete silence. I need a fan or music or anything to drown out the possibility of hearing that sound again. Because sometimes, if it's too quiet, I swear I can still hear it. That slow, deliberate breathing, just a few feet away, waiting for me to turn off the lights. I was 19 when this happened, driving home late one night after visiting my girlfriend. It was a 2-hour drive through backcountry roads in Virginia. No streetlights, no houses for long stretches, just forest pressing in on either side. Around 1 a.m., I saw her. A woman stood on the shoulder of the road, her white dress glowing faintly in my headlights. She didn't move as I approached, just stood there, perfectly still, with her head tilted down. Her hair hung forward, covering most of her face. At first I thought she'd been in an accident, maybe a hitchhiker in trouble. My instinct was to slow down, maybe even stop, but something in my gut screamed, "Don't." The way she stood, rigid, unnatural, felt wrong. I drove past, heart hammering. For a few seconds, curiosity got the better of me, and I checked my rearview mirror. She was gone. Not walking away, not shrinking into the distance, gone. The road behind me was empty, flat, no trees or turnoffs for her to vanish into. I pressed harder on the gas, trying to shake it off, telling myself I must have been more tired than I thought. But 5 minutes later, I saw her again. Same woman, same white dress, standing on the side of the road just ahead of me. This time my skin went cold all over. It was impossible. I had just passed her. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles ached, refusing to look directly at her as I blew past. Again, I checked the mirror. Again, nothing. By then, I was trembling, fighting the urge to pull over and just sit in until morning. But I didn't want to stop on that road. I kept going. Another 10 minutes, another bend in the road. And there she was again, closer this time. I nearly drove off the shoulder when I saw her face for the first time. The hair had fallen back just enough, and her skin was pale, her mouth stretched too wide, as if she were screaming silently. That broke me. I floored it, not daring to look anywhere but straight ahead. For the next 20 miles, I refused to blink at the mirrors, refused to glance at the side of the road. I just drove, praying she wouldn't appear again. When I finally reached the highway, I pulled into a brightly lit gas station and sat there for almost an hour, shaking so badly I could hardly hold my phone. Years later, I mentioned it to a coworker who grew up in the same county. His face drained of color. "You saw her too," he said quietly. He told me people called her the Lady of Route 606. Dozens of drivers had reported seeing her over the decades. Always a pale woman in white, always appearing multiple times along the same stretch of road. Some even claimed she tried to wave them down, or worse, that she appeared suddenly in their back seat when they slowed to help. I've never taken that road again after dark. To this day, if I find myself driving late at night, I catch myself gripping the wheel, half expecting to see her standing in the headlights once more. And part of me knows, if I ever stop for her, she'll finally get in. I grew up in a small farmhouse in rural Pennsylvania, built sometime in the late 1800s. It creaked in all the usual ways old houses do, and my siblings and I were used to hearing strange little noises at night. But there was one sound none of us could explain, and it still unsettles me whenever I think about it. It started when I was 12. One night, just after I'd turned out my bedside lamp, I heard 3 slow knocks on my bedroom wall. Not on the door. On the wall itself, the one that faced the outside of the house. I froze, waiting for it to come again. And it did. 3 more, evenly spaced. I got up and checked the window. Nothing. Just the dark yard, empty and still. I told myself it was probably the pipes, or maybe an animal outside brushing against the siding. But the knocks kept happening. Not every night, but often enough. Always 3. Always on that same wall. A few weeks later, my sister, whose room was across the hall, asked if I'd been knocking on her wall at night. I hadn't. She said she'd heard it too. 3 slow knocks, like someone rapping with their knuckles. It wasn't until my younger brother mentioned hearing the same thing that we realized all of us were being woken by it. One night, determined to prove it was nothing, I stayed awake with the lights off. Sure enough, around 2 a.m., the knocks came. 3 of them, deliberate, on the wall right beside my bed. I whispered, "Who's there?" What I heard next chilled me more than the knocking ever had. a faint voice whispered back, so soft I almost thought I imagined it. Let me in. I bolted to my parents' room. My dad came stomping down the hall with a flashlight, went outside, and walked the perimeter of the house. No footprints, no signs of anyone. He told us it was the old wood settling, nothing more. But he couldn't explain the voice. Over the years, the knocking continued. Sometimes it would stop for months, only to return when we'd nearly forgotten it. Friends who stayed over heard it too. One of them refused to come back after he swore he saw a shadow outside my window at the same time the knocks came. The strangest part happened after we moved out. My parents sold the farmhouse when I was in college. A year later, I ran into the family who bought it. We made small talk until the new owner hesitated and asked, "Did you ever hear knocking in that house? 3 knocks, always at night?" The way my stomach dropped told him everything he needed to know. I don't know what was in that house, or why it wanted us to let it in. I only know that it followed a pattern, intelligent and deliberate. And no matter how many times I try to rationalize it, I can still hear that whisper in my memory, as clear as if someone were leaning right beside my ear. Let me in. I used to work nights as a delivery driver for a small family-owned diner in upstate New York. The roads around our town were mostly rural, long, dark stretches of highway flanked by thick woods. It was lonely work, but the pay was decent, and I actually enjoyed the quiet most nights. One night in late fall, I got an order to deliver to a cabin several miles outside town. It was close to midnight, and the fog was unusually heavy, the kind that swallows headlights whole. As I drove, the world outside my windshield narrowed to about 20 feet of hazy road. I don't know why I glanced into my rearview mirror when I did. Habit, maybe. But what I saw made my stomach drop. There was a man sitting in my back seat. He wasn't there when I left the diner. I was certain of that. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were wide, unblinking, locked directly on me. I swerved violently, the car skidding on loose gravel, and when I looked again, the back seat was empty. I pulled over, heart hammering, and turned on the interior light. Nothing. The back seat was just as it should be. A few delivery bags, a crumpled jacket, an old box of napkins. I told myself it was the fog, the stress, maybe even a trick of my tired eyes. I kept driving, but every few minutes, when I glanced in the mirror, I'd catch him again. Sometimes his head was tilted unnaturally to the side, like his neck couldn't quite hold it up. Sometimes his mouth was open, as if he were trying to speak, but no sound came out. Each time, I'd jerk my eyes away, then look back to find nothing there. By the time I reached the cabin, my nerves were shot. I half expected the man to appear beside me when I rolled down the window to hand over the food. The customer, an older woman, paid quickly and gave me an apologetic smile. "You drove all this way?" she said softly, as though surprised. Most folks refuse this route after dark. I forced a laugh, though my voice shook. "Why's that?" She hesitated, then said, "There's a story about a man who died on this road years ago. Car accident. People say he tries to hitch a ride back into town. Sometimes he doesn't wait to be invited." I must have gone pale because she frowned. "You look like you've seen him." I mumbled something about being tired and left as quickly as I could. The drive back was worse. Every glance at the mirror showed him closer, clearer. Once, I swear I felt the seat behind me shift, as though someone leaned forward. When I finally pulled into the diner's lot, I killed the engine, flung open the door, and stumbled out. The night was silent, empty. But when I looked at my car windows, I froze. There was a handprint on the inside of the back window, a fresh one smeared against the glass. I sold that car within the week. To this day, I can't drive at night without constantly checking my rear view. And sometimes, just sometimes, I catch the pale outline of a face staring back at me. On January 2nd, 1935, a man checked into the President Hotel in Kansas City under the name Roland T. Owen. He carried no luggage except for a comb and a toothbrush, and he asked for a small interior room, 1046. The staff immediately sensed something was wrong. Owen was tall, broad-shouldered, and seemed nervous, as if someone might be following him. He kept the blinds drawn, the lights dim, and spent long hours sitting silently. Over the next 2 days, his behavior unsettled employees. The maid said he wouldn't let her open the curtains. The phone rang often, and Owen spoke in low, urgent tones. Once she overheard him mutter, "No, Don, I don't want to eat. I don't want to go anywhere. I just want to stay here." On the night of January 3rd, a guest complained of loud voices from 1046 to men arguing, furniture scraping, and heavy thuds. Yet when staff checked, the hallway was silent. The next morning, the switchboard noticed Owen's phone was off the hook. A bellboy went up. When he knocked, a weak voice called out, "Come in." But the door was locked from the inside. After several tries, the bellboy entered with a passkey and froze. Owen was kneeling on the floor, naked and drenched in blood. His skull was caved in, his wrists and ankles bound with cord, stab wounds piercing his chest. The walls and sheets were smeared red, as if he had staggered through the room in agony. Still alive, Owen whispered that nobody had hurt him, claiming he had fallen against the bathtub. Within hours at the hospital, he was dead. The investigation only deepened the mystery. Roland T. Owen didn't exist. The name was false. Fingerprints revealed nothing. For months, the body went unidentified until a woman finally recognized him as Artemis Ogletree, a 17-year-old from Birmingham, Alabama. Even then, the strangeness grew. Months after his death, Ogletree's mother received typed letters, supposedly from her son, written in a style that didn't sound like him. Later, she received a phone call from a man insisting Artemis was alive and living overseas. Police determined someone was impersonating him. Who was Don, the man Owen seemed afraid of? Why had Ogletree traveled hundreds of miles under an alias with no luggage? Who kept sending letters after he was dead? The case remains unsolved. Some believe he was lured into a trap by organized crime or a secret lover. Others think his killer stayed hidden in the hotel, slipping away unseen. Room 1046 no longer exists. The floor was renovated, but staff and guests whisper of strange chills, footsteps, and faint knocking in its hallway. Nearly a century later, the mystery of the boy in room 1046 lingers, one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in American history. A young man checked in under a false name and never checked out. His killer and their reasons remain shadows, leaving only blood and unanswered questions.